transfer window that saw the British record broken, but only after Alexander Isak managed to force a move from Newcastle to Liverpool. We'll discuss the topic of player power. No forcing a move, though, for Marc Guehi, who ended up remaining with Crystal Palace. We'll take a dive into what happened there and what could happen next. The business has continued today, including Gianluigi Donnarumma moving to Manchester City. We'll round up all of the day's late deals for you. And what a weekend it was for Nicholas Jackson, avoiding a Peter Odemwingie on deadline day and getting his move. We'll be breaking that one right down for you this hour as well. After months of speculation and controversy, Alexander Isak secured that move from Newcastle to Liverpool for a British record transfer fee yesterday. The striker has cost the Premier League champions £125 million. But are both clubs happy with their business? Pete Graves is outside St James's Park for us. Vinny O'Connor's at Anfield. Pete, good to see you. Firstly to you, look, what has Isak had to say about Newcastle today on his way out?
Thanks, Will. He's basically said thank you, hasn't he, to Newcastle United's supporters and the club. I think there was a period where I think the fans thought he wasn't going to say anything. He'd sort of moved to Liverpool and obviously hasn't played all summer, hadn't played any of the games so far this season. And the signing was announced and there was no mention of Newcastle, no mention of the supporters, no mention of the history. So I think there was a period where the fans were thinking maybe he's not going to say anything at all. But in fairness, in the last half an hour or so, he has come out and he's offered a thank you. There's a video of him scoring goals and he's stopped short of apologising, I think, which some Newcastle fans would have been wanting. But he has given a thank you to Newcastle United supporters and to the football club and mentioned that it's been an honour to get the club back into the Champions League and help them win their first domestic trophy in 70 years. So he has spoken, and that will be appreciated by some, even though, as I'm standing here today, of course, it is the day after deadline day. He has only just moved to Liverpool, and it's still quite raw here. There's still a lot of, I suppose, disappointment and anger that a player who was so important for Newcastle United has decided to move away. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, in sort of down the line, like I say, it's still very raw, but down the line, Newcastle fans will hopefully be able to look back with some fondness at the period that Isak played for the club. He, of course, scored the goal in the final that helped them secure that first domestic trophy in 70 years, the Carabao Cup. And I think it's just the nature of some footballers and some people in life. That's just the way it is. If you play for the team that finished second in the league and the team that finished first in the league wants to sign you, some players and some people would like to go that one step higher. That's just the nature. But there are other characters in the game who would stay at the football club regardless, that wear the badge with pride and would not leave despite what temptations may be coming elsewhere. Alexander Isak plays for a team that finished fifth in the league and won the Carabao Cup. He's decided he wanted to move to a team that won the league and will be challenging for the league once again and challenging to win the Champions League. Yes, Newcastle fans are disappointed. Yes, it's still very raw, but down the line, might they look back with some pride and happiness at the period over the last few years? Bearing in mind as well the money that's come in from that sale, they've been able to completely rejuvenate this Newcastle United squad. They brought in a goalkeeper, a defender, a midfielder, a winger and two centre forwards effectively this window as a result of that sale. So I think in time Newcastle fans will probably reflect quite happily on this window in general, and they'll just be hoping to have a big season and no doubt hoping they can get one over Liverpool when they go to Anfield later in the season.
Yeah, Pete, I wonder what the Newcastle players have made of this whole ordeal. It is an ordeal, it's a saga, whatever word you want to use. It's stretched on, hasn't it, for the whole summer, and how their relationship potentially might have changed with Alexander Isak. But Anthony Gordon's had something to say, hasn't he, today?
Yeah, I mean, look, some players have come out and spoken of the friendship. I think Anthony Gordon put something on his social media talking about the friendship and their chemistry on the field. And there's no doubt about it. Gordon and Isak had a great on-field chemistry. You look at Jacob Murphy and Isak as well, particularly last season, how well they played together. I think Sven Botman as well was someone who came out publicly and thanked Alexander and wished him well. that's 2 players. I haven't seen too many more. I mean, that might be quite telling. I haven't seen, sometimes in these situations, you see the entire squad liking posts and good luck, mate, and all that in the comments. I haven't seen too many players come out. And I think that, Eddie Howe is so all about creating this family environment. His players he wants them to all be best friends and to all feel like a family and to have each other's backs and so on. And I just wonder how many of the players, and I've spoken to some, are disappointed by the way that this summer has played out. Isak, of course, firstly refusing to play in pre-season friendlies, then refusing to go on the summer tour of the Far East, then refusing to pull on his boots and play in the opening Premier League games and that League Cup match as well. So, he's missed a host of matches, and I think there will be players who are disappointed in the way he's gone on this summer. But, football, short memories. I think once the international break's over and Newcastle United get back on the field with the new players in the squad, then all memories of Alexander Isak will soon be gone.
Yeah, and finally, Pete, I just wonder also, how Newcastle feel officially, because if the statement's anything to go by, it was hardly song and verse, was it? But Eddie Howe, as you mentioned, is glad to put it all behind him.
I heard that the typewriter just ran out of ink, unfortunately, so they just had to put it out. No, yeah, it was a very short statement, wasn't it? Just 30 odd words. Mentioned how many games he'd played, but no mention of the sort of goals or anything else. I think it is a bit of a sad end to something. I just think that the Newcastle United ownership and coaching staff and some of the players, as I mentioned, will be disappointed with the way that this summer has played out. But you know what? It's over now. And as a football club, Newcastle United can start moving forward without Alexander Isak in their squad. They know who's here. They've got a full squad of players who want to be here, including those 6 new additions this summer. So, yeah, not a nice end to what was a wonderful sort of marriage in some ways between Alexander Isak and Newcastle United. Let's not forget, he was a fairly unknown player. Real Sociedad, hadn't scored a huge number of goals. Eddie Howe saw something in him that he believed could turn him into a top Premier League player. He brought him to the Premier League, he gave him the platform, he coached him, he improved him, and he's become, without doubt, if not the best striker in the Premier League, then one of the best strikers in the Premier League. But he's now a Liverpool player, Premier League transfer record, as you said. And and I think Liverpool have signed a wonderful player, and Newcastle United will move on with their new look squad, and will look to try and move on from Alexander Isak just as quickly as possible.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'll tell you what, the typewriters from the Liverpool fans have not run out of ink, have they, Vinny O'Connor at Anfield, because they're saying plenty of things about Alexander Isak, and I just wonder how much that guy can take Liverpool to the next level, Vinny.
I think so. I think that's the feeling here at Liverpool because, of course, he adds greater potency to their attack. When you look at his goal-scoring record, I was going through the stats from last season, of course, and I know Arneslot talked about Cody Gakpo and Luis Diaz kind of matching the kind of numbers that Mo Salah was providing himself. But at the same time, the combined goal total in the Premier League between Cody Gakpo and Luis Diaz was 23, the same amount as Alexander Isak scored in the Premier League last season. Darwin Núñez himself, who Alexander Isak is taking that number 9 shirt. Darwin Núñez scored just 5 Premier League goals last season as well. They really have got that focal point now for their attack. It takes a little bit of pressure, I suppose, off Hugo Ekitike. I think someone like Florian Wirtz will benefit as well, not just from the fact that he can lay on chances for someone like Alexander Isak, and there's a good chance that he'll finish them. I mean, you look at his percentage goal scoring rate in the Premier League, his goals per game ratio, and it's something like, it's close to Mo Salah's. It's around the 62-63% mark, just like Mo Salah's as well. So, as well as that, Alexander Isak attracts players, creates space for midfielders like Florian Wirtz as well, and he brings players into play. And again, the wide players, Mo Salah will benefit, Cody Gakpo benefit from having that kind of focal point through the middle, that kind of Premier League know-how that Alexander Isak brings. So in terms of that Liverpool attack, yeah, of course, there's going to be a great deal of excitement, I think, amongst the playing staff, amongst the management, but undoubtedly the fans. You've seen the reaction from the fans on social media as well. Yes, it's been a long-running saga to get to this point, but the fact that Alexander Isak is a Liverpool player has been met with a good deal of approval around these parts.
All fans having missed out on Marc Guehi so late on in the window.
I think it would have been a bigger problem for Liverpool if they hadn't got Alexander Isak in. And I say that, of course, Liverpool would be better had they been able to bring Marc Guehi in as well. But at the same time, I mentioned Hugo Ekitike benefiting from someone like Alexander Isak being there and taking the kind of focus off him and really providing that spearhead in attack for Liverpool. I think Liverpool have the players that means they can cope without Marc Guehi at the back. Obviously, they've got that tried and tested partnership between Virgil van Dijk and Ibrahima Konate. Joe Gomez, we saw coming on as a substitute for Konate against Arsenal, and how important his contribution was in the latter stages of that game. Not more so than getting in front of Gyökeres at the near post and being able to clear behind for a corner kick as well. Leone has, of course, come in. We're expecting big things from him, albeit maybe not so much this season. You expect him to be maybe drip-fed into that first-team picture as well. But, yeah, obviously Liverpool would have been a lot stronger had Marc Guehi come in. At the same time, it's not necessarily dead. It's not necessarily set in stone that he won't become a Liverpool player. It's something they can revisit if they need to in January and perhaps come up with a deal with Crystal Palace. Or, of course, they can wait until the end of the season. We know that, obviously, Marc Guehi can speak to foreign clubs when it comes to January, whereas he'll just have 6 months left on his contract. And maybe Liverpool could take a little bit of a risk in that terms, given that we know he wanted to come here and wait until the end of the season to get him on a free. So that's looking at the long game. But for now, I think Liverpool will feel that they have the players that can cope without the signing of Marc Guehi.
Vinny, thank you very much. So both Wissa and Isak get their moves after a protracted period where they haven't been playing football. Our chief correspondent, Carvey Solikor, and football correspondent Rob Dorset join me now. Rob, what does this suggest, given what's happened over the last 12 hours or so? And, for large parts of the window, do players have too much power? And what can we take away from this?
It's certain that players have a lot of power if they're as good as Marc Guehi and Alexander Isak and Yoane Wissa. And look, I've been speaking to a lot of people involved in football and involved around the recruitment part of football, and Carvey does as well. And they're saying that it's definitely changed in recent years. If you are as good as these players are, then you have an awful lot of power. And I think what's really significant and interesting for me in this window is we've seen more, particularly strikers, top strikers, move to the Premier League than we've ever seen before. And that speaks volumes about the purchasing power of the Premier League and the pull of the Premier League and why they want to come here. But with Isak and Wissa, they both agitated in the extreme, didn't they, if we can describe it like that, to make sure they got their moves. Both of them put very strong, shocking statements on social media, let's be honest, where they criticised their own employers, said that promises had been broken, and they got their move as a result of that. Now, would they have got their move without that sort of agitation? Interesting to see. I don't think Alexander Isak would have got his move away from Newcastle. They were desperate to keep hold of him. And Brentford were very keen to keep hold of Wissa as well. And you compare that with Marc Guehi, who's loves Crystal Palace and has been the ultimate professional in the way that he's played, scored that wonder goal in what we thought might be his final game for Crystal Palace. And yet he hasn't got his move and he hasn't agitated for a move. Is there a connection there? On the face of it, it would seem so. And the people I speak to in the industry say there is now, if you are an elite player, an inordinate amount of power that those players hold and their representatives. And if they exercise that power, they often get their wish. And the bottom line is clubs don't want to keep players that are unhappy. It's very difficult for a manager and for a club to keep a player that has been as explicit as Wissa and Isak were in saying they wanted to leave. I think it was a very difficult situation for Brentford, an even more difficult situation for Newcastle. And it felt an inevitability that those players would leave in the end. I felt the same about Guehi, and he didn't move. I don't know. Maybe there's something in that.
Carvey, has the behaviour, particularly of Yoane Wissa and Alexander Isak in this window, set a dangerous precedent? Is this a trend we are going to see more of going forward?
I think we've seen a lot of it in the past as well. I mean, going back many, many years, we had players like Pierre van Hooijdonk at Nottingham Forest, for instance. So this is not something new. I think something that is perhaps new, though, is, and without, I'm not referring specifically to the Isak or the Wissa case, what we've seen more and more of recently is sort of intermediaries getting involved and players making their minds up well in advance about which clubs they want to go to. Whereas in the old days, what used to happen is that a club would pick up the phone and call another club and make an offer, and only when a deal had been agreed would permission be given for the player to speak to his prospective new club. Whereas that seems to have changed. I don't know if it's got something to do with the amount of intermediaries in the game, or because of social media. Because if you look at social media, so many players appear to have agreed personal terms. Well, how can you agree personal terms when a deal hasn't been done between the clubs? I mean, in the old days, we used to call it tapping up. Yeah. And if it happened, it would be reported to the governing bodies, and clubs would be charged. Whereas now it just seems to be just accepted that these players, and again, I'm not saying that's the case with Isak or it's the case with Wissa, but things seem to have been set up well in advance with a lot of these deals that we've seen go through.
And I think, in fairness, you look at the Morgan Gibbs-White situation at Forest and his failed move to Tottenham. Remember, Forest accused Tottenham of tapping him up, made a formal complaint to the Premier League about it. And you and I both must have thought, God, that's quite old school. You know, that we don't hear that anymore, because it's
you don't hear the term tapping up.
You don't.
Anymore.
No, it's exactly absolutely right, and it's become a part of the norm. Carver's absolutely right that clubs who want to buy a player will sound them out. Are they interested? If you are interested, what might it cost us in terms of wages? How long would you be looking for in a contract? That's normal now, and Carver's quite right. That never used to be the case. And with Morgan Gibbs-White staying at Forest and signing a new contract after they'd accused Spurs of tapping him up and making an offer that they felt was bang on what his release clause was, that felt like a throwback. And I was a little bit amazed that fell through, if you like. And there's an example of player power not working, because Gibbs-White wanted his move, didn't get it. He's very happy to stay at Forest and sign a new contract, by the way, but it doesn't always work.
There's been so much talk of gentlemen's agreements, broken promises. How much do you think there'll be a tightening up from clubs, from agents, from all parties in the way that these contracts are actually structured to avoid the he said, she said, I could go, he said, she didn't?
I think, football, the contracts are really long and complicated. There's a lot in them. I don't think you can change them in any way to deal with this whole issue of players thinking they've been made promises and the club hasn't kept the promise. I think all that happens is they have conversations with a director of football or with a head coach, and maybe they're told, look, if a suitable bid comes in for you, then we would consider it. And maybe, one person has a different recollection of what was said in that conversation to the other person, or the director of football moves on and he's replaced by somebody else. I think that's a real grey area. But the bottom line is, a promise is not worth anything in football unless it's written down in a legally binding contract.
And I spoke to a specialist legal sports lawyer on exactly that subject over the matter of Alexander Isak, who said that promises had been broken. And this lawyer said to me, he hasn't got a case. It's as simple as that. If it's not written down, the Premier League rules on contracted players are very clear. If it is not in their official form and written down, it doesn't have any legal grounding, unless he goes and makes perhaps a separate claim legally away from football. So Carver's absolutely right. There's an awful lot of these discussions that happen. Christian Purslow, who we had live on the programme yesterday during deadline day, was at Aston Villa, and he was talking to me about how he'd made promises to players in the past that when he was trying to sell a football club, if they didn't get the club sold, he'd let them leave. And people were good for their word back then, is the way he described it to me. I'm not sure it works like that right now.
Given how much money Liverpool have spent in this window, guys, and look, there we go, £446.5 million. I mean, 42 is like your old 1.5, isn't it, these days? But, I mean, well, two separate questions. The extra pressure, Carve, on Arne Slot now to deliver with that squad that he has, and I know they've recouped a lot of money as well. But if they don't win the Premier League, Carve, or they don't win the Champions League, is that a failure?
I think, yes, it would be. I think the important thing to stress there is the net spend. Liverpool's net spend is around 200 million. They didn't spend very much, if anything at all, last summer. So it's only 100 million every year. So I think we should keep that in mind as well. I know a big thing is going to be made out of the fact that it looks like they've spent more than £400 million, but the important thing is the net spend. Will it be a failure if they don't win the title or the Champions League? I think it would be. But even before they did this spending this summer, I made them the favourites to win the Premier League. I think the Champions League, obviously, it's tougher to win, but I think they've got a very good chance of winning that now with this squad that they've assembled.
Well, that's the key point that Carve made, isn't it? You know, it's all well and good pumping out 446.5, but actually outgoings, and the latest of those being Harvey Elliott with an obligation to buy, it's pretty good business, isn't it?
Well, look, yeah, we've seen it with Chelsea and Manchester City have really active production lines of young talent coming through. And the amount of resource that they pump into those young players in their academies is bearing fruit, because if they don't feature for the first team very much, they sell them on, and that enables them to spend on top-level players. And it's what the elite clubs do these days. For Liverpool, I was staggered by the amount they spent. And incredibly impressed with the window that they had. It felt to me, Liverpool, the reigning Premier League champions, were there to be shot at, and it needed the other clubs to buy in to match their squads. They had a lot of changes in attacking departments, and that's what anybody connected with Liverpool will tell you. They lost 3 forward players that they needed to replace, and that was largely where they spent their money. But they're definitely stronger than they were last season, and it's a matter for everybody else to try and catch them, isn't it?
Yeah. Gents, thanks for now. Right, almost £3.2 billion spent in the window, and not a penny of it on Marc Guehi. We'll be assessing if the fallout of Crystal Palace, Marc Guehi, I should say. Marc Guihi's come back from Sunderland to Chelsea. That was the one that's thrown me. We'll talk about the Crystal Palace captain and a tricky deadline for him after the break. Well, the window may have closed yesterday, but there were still a few deals that carried over into today, particularly for Manchester City. Gianluigi Donnarumma has finalised that move to the Etihad after a £26 million deal was confirmed this morning. He joins from Paris Saint-Germain on a 5-year deal. That deal has allowed Edison to get the move that he'd been waiting for, as the 6-time Premier League winner departed for Fenerbahce for £12 million. Manuel Akanji has also left Manchester City, as his loan to Inter Milan was confirmed earlier. That deal has an option to buy for £13 million, but will become obligatory if he makes a certain number of appearances. Another centre-back leaving the Premier League, West Ham's Naif Aguerd. His permanent move to Marseille was confirmed today. Joining him in France at Marseille, Brighton's Matt O'Reilly. The Danish international joins on a straight loan for the rest of the season. And finally, Fulham have announced the signing of Bayern Munich's Yona Kusi Asare. He joins on loan with an option to make that deal permanent as well. The window in Scotland and England may be shut, but clubs can still sign free agents and players can still move to a number of different leagues. The Eredivisie window shuts tonight, while there's still 10 days for players to move to Turkey, and even longer for players to move to Portugal and Saudi Arabia. Let's talk about Marc Guehi, shall we? Not Marc Guehi, because he is still a Crystal Palace player today after his move to Liverpool fell through. Carve and Rob still with me. Go on then, Carve. What happened yesterday?
Well, I think it was a really tense, stressful, high-pressure day for everybody associated with Crystal Palace. But at the end of the day, the chairman, Steve Parish, had a really, really tough decision to make. And he had to make a decision which was best for Crystal Palace Football Club. And his decision was that Marc Guehi could not leave. It was a really difficult call to make, but I think he was confident that he made the right decision. And when he made that decision, he communicated it to the manager, Oliver Glasner, and also the player, I think, in face-to-face talks. Now, the reason Marc Guehi didn't go to Liverpool, I think, is partly to do with how much did Liverpool actually want him. Because I don't think any discussions about him moving to Liverpool started until the Community Shield. The two sides were playing each other. And I think that was a chance for executive, perhaps from Liverpool, to speak to executives about Crystal Palace about a potential move for Marc Guehi. And when they did make their bid last week, it was £35 million plus a 10% sell-on clause. They were absolutely adamant that they were not going to go above that. We all know how disciplined Liverpool are when it comes to doing their transfer business. They have set valuations. OK, on Alexander Isak, they went up a little bit. On Marc Guehi, they were not willing to go up at all. I think if they'd increased their bid, if it was 50 million, Palace would have bitten their hand off and Marc Guehi would now be a Crystal Palace player. But the money on the table wasn't quite enough and Crystal Palace weren't able to find an experienced replacement. Yes, they bought a young centre-back who I think has great potential to be a brilliant defender going forward, but Oliver Glasner was very clear he wanted somebody experienced. I think if they'd managed to get Manuel Akanji from Manchester City, he ended up going to Inter Milan, then I think Marc Guehi would have gone. But make no mistake, it was high stakes, it was very stressful, very pressurised situation. Steve Parish had to make a decision, and I think in the end he made the right decision for Crystal Palace, a decision that aligned with what Oliver Glasner wanted, and I think in the long term it could prove to be the right decision for Marc Guehi as well, because he's going to be a free agent, and in January he can talk to some of the biggest clubs in the world, as well as Liverpool,
well, Rob, one of the
who are
weirdest
one of the
things to
biggest
come out
clubs
of
in
that was
the world.
actually that Brighton were willing to loan a player to Crystal Palace, which I thought was quite strange in the grand scheme of things. And then obviously we hear that Igor Julia wanted to go to West Ham, but
that was the key to it. And Carve's right. Palace were looking at options, and Glasner had been very clear that he was this young player that they brought in, the 19-year-old centre-back JD Canvo, from Toulouse, is a great prospect. He's 19. Glasner was very clear that he doesn't think that covers a Marc Guehi-sized hole in his squad if they only get Canvo. And so they were trying for Akanji. They tried very hard for Igor, and they thought they had a solution in place with Igor. He was in the building. He was having a medical. And then there were delays with Marc Guehi and some suggestion that Marc Guehi might be returning to Crystal Palace and the deal might be off. And Igor Julio and his representatives, I'm told, got cold feet at that point because they were told that Guehi was going and he'd be playing a lot of first-team football. He'd be one of the first choices, one of the first names on Crystal Palace's team sheet. And I think they had concerns that if, as is now the case, Guehi didn't go, that might affect him. Remember, he's played very little football for 6 months at Brighton. He wanted to play football. And so they had West Ham waiting in the wings, and Igor Julio decided at the last minute to go to West Ham instead. And I say last minute, remember that they had to put a deal sheet in at West Ham to get Igor over the line to sign for West Ham. It really was last minute. And so I've got a lot of sympathy for Palace here in knowing that they've got one of their best players, their talisman, their captain, who's worth an awful lot more than £35 million. Potentially leaving for nothing next summer if they keep him on as they have done now. Or they sell him, get £35 million for the club, and they upset Oliver Glasner, who's not got the players that he wants. For Steve Parish, it was an impossible situation. He was bound to upset somebody. And I think it was a very difficult situation. But Carve's right. For Marc Guehi in the long term, this is no bad thing. He's still a young player. He's still one of the best defenders in world football, as far as I'm concerned. One of the first names on England's team sheet anyway. He will have his pick of a lot of big European clubs next summer, and he'll go for free.
And I've heard a lot of Crystal Palace fans actually say, well, hold on, we stood firm. How much was on the table back in the day from Newcastle for Marc Guehi?
65 million from Newcastle, 70 million nearly from Tottenham.
So there we go. So,
at the end
Crystal
of the January
Palace fans
window
would say, well, hold on. So we turned down essentially 35 million. Right, if you see where I'm going with this, in terms of half of the 70 to keep him, and he captained us to the FA Cup, right, and a Community Shield win over Liverpool. We'll write off another 35 and see what happens this season in the Conference League and the Premier League places, top six.
But again, this is where it's very difficult for football clubs, and we've just been talking about player power. My understanding is that Marc Guehi didn't want to go to Newcastle, and he didn't want to go to Tottenham. Tottenham at the time were in the bottom three of the Premier League. In January, when they came in with that £70 million offer for him. Marc Guehi is thinking he wants to challenge for trophies. He wants to be in the Champions League. He didn't want to go to a team as big as it is, a club as big as it is as Spurs, when they're in the doldrums like that.
And he's won a bigger trophy than Newcastle, won League Cup, FA Cup, hasn't he?
And also, he wasn't convinced about Newcastle as well. They were still unsure about some of their recruitment. Alexander Isak, there were doubts over his future then. So it's difficult for Palace in that scenario. If the player doesn't want to go there, it doesn't matter how much a club is prepared to offer and bid for them if the player doesn't want to go. And so this is where it's been a very complex situation with Marc Guehi for a long time now. Ultimately, though, Crystal Palace have lost out on a big asset who we expect to leave for nothing now next summer. And that's difficult for Palace fans to stomach. Yes, they'll be delighted they've got him for the rest of this season, assuming he doesn't go in January, of course. But it was a no-win for Palace, whichever way it went, in truth.
Yeah, and look, the cynics side of it would look at it and go, actually, well, from his point of view, and this won't be his main motivation, but his agent, for example, will look at it and go, well, that £35 million that someone was going to spend on you in your last year of your contract, some of that can sit in your pocket as a signing on fee. We've seen it with Trent, for example. And as you say, Carver, he can talk to an overseas club in January. Well, where does this leave the relationship? Because there was all sorts of talk last night that Glasner was going down the route of an ultimatum. He goes, I go sort of thing. How now does this play out with Glasner and Guehi? Guehi and the fans, I think, is always going to be fine. But Guehi and the manager and the future, the next 6 months.
I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of exactly what happened behind the scenes. My understanding of the situation now is that the relationship between Steve Parish and Oliver Glasner is pretty good. I think Steve Parish got in touch with Oliver Glasner to tell him that he'd made the decision to keep Marc Guehi, and Oliver Glasner felt that he'd made the right decision. I think the other thing that Steve Parish had to think long and hard about was the fact that this is, I think Palace fans would say, this is the best Palace side of all time. Incredible to win the FA Cup, the Community Shield. They've made a great start to the season, even though they've sold Eberechi Eze. Brilliant performance against Villa the other night, but Ismail Assar is injured. Adam Wharton is injured. So could you really have the situation where after the international break, you're asking Oliver Glasner to go again without Sarr, without Wharton, and with Marc Guehi having been sold and not replaced properly? So I think these things were all in Steve Parish's mind as well. And I think they are part of the reason that he made this call to keep Marc Guehi. But I do think if Liverpool really, I mean, obviously they really wanted Marc Guehi, but if he'd been a real priority, I think actually he was a priority, but I just think Liverpool are disciplined. They weren't going to pay £50 million for a player who's only got a year left on his contract. If they had been, he would be a Liverpool player. And I think Marc Guehi is really disappointed. Of course you would be, because you're thinking, OK, I love Crystal Palace. I'm the captain of Crystal Palace, but this is an incredible opportunity. It's right here in front of me. I could be playing against Real Madrid. Are they playing in the Champions League in a couple of weeks' time? So I think, he needs to get his head straight again, but he's very level-headed as it is. And I think, as Rob said, he is going to get a big move, whether it's going to be in January or it's going to be next summer, because he's been offered. Palace have sat down with him and said, look, new contract, basically whatever you want, maybe a release clause next summer. But he's stuck to his guns and he said, look, I just want to, stick to the contract that I have and consider my options next year. You're
talking about relationships. I've been told pretty categorically that there is now a strained relationship between Marc Guehi and Oliver Glasner, the manager, because rightly or wrongly, Guehi is convinced that Glasner had a big part to play in his failure of a dream move to Anfield. I mean, these pictures we're showing you now were after the first game of the season at Stamford Bridge. Carve was there and he saw Oliver Glasner beckoning to Marc Guehi to come over and talk to the fans, and Guehi went straight down the tunnel. Look, that was before the deadline day happened, but my understanding is that Marc Guehi is incredibly disappointed. He did want to go to Liverpool and he feels that that's been taken away from him. But the difference is he's such a good guy, he's such a good character, that he will not agitate for a move now. He will not sulk. He will do what he's always done for Crystal Palace, which is be as professional as he possibly can and serve them for the remainder of his contract. But of course, remember, in January, he is free to talk to other clubs abroad and potentially sign a pre-contract agreement with clubs abroad. And it's been made clear to me some of the biggest clubs in Europe are interested in him now. So yes, he's stayed at Crystal Palace for now. I don't see him being a Crystal Palace player in 12 months' time, because I think, no disrespect to Crystal Palace, but bigger things await.
Just very quickly, actually an interesting detail. I think on Saturday, Oliver Glasner had a meeting with Steve Parish where they talked about the implications of what could happen on deadline day. This was just a day before the Aston Villa game. And I think they talked through the various scenarios, and it was made clear that if they were able to get in an experienced centre-back, then Oliver Glasner would be happy. Well, not happy, but he would accept Marc Guehi being sold. But unfortunately, on deadline day, Crystal Palace weren't able to do that. And Steve Parish, his priority has to be Crystal Palace. It's not just Marc Guehi's future, even though Marc Guehi has been such a fantastic player for the club.
Right, and to throw into the mix, Glasner's contract in the last year,
Which is
next
up in
year
12
as well.
months, yeah.
That's for another show.
Yeah, we'll come back to you on that one. Great work from you two so far. Right, up next, we're going to talk about the players, two players, in fact, who were in transfer limbo on deadline day. Nicholas Jackson finally got the move to Bayern Munich. Emi Martinez still stuck at Aston Villa. We'll tell you what it means for both of them shortly. Don't go anywhere. Chelsea, is it? And so it proved this summer, with plenty of business done during the window. Carve, Rob, they're the masters, aren't they, of not just, bringing in this young talent and giving them these long contracts, but actually getting good value when they kick players out the door.
They needed to, because obviously they were fined by UEFA for breaking their financial rules, and part of the agreement they came to with UEFA was that they would, it's complicated, but basically sort of balance their transfer spending this summer. And that is what they've done, because, OK, they've spent quite a bit on buying players, but they haven't broken the bank. They haven't spent Isak money or Florian Wirtz money. And also they've made a lot of money from selling players. For instance, even the deal yesterday for Nicholas Jackson, that could potentially be worth £70 million. Now that is of course dependent on how many appearances he makes for Bayern Munich, how well he does out there, but potentially that is an incredible deal for them. I think where Chelsea have been really, really clever in the transfer market was moving early, because if you remember, we had two transfer windows this summer for the first time. The early one was for the Club World Cup. They were playing in the Club World Cup, and they moved really, really quickly to sign Liam Delap. Basically every Premier League club wanted him. They managed to get Liam Delap for just £30 million. And then they got João Pedro, a story that Rob here broke, while they were out playing in the Club World Cup. So when you
Delap know about that?
I don't know, did you tell him?
He's quite right. I mean, there was an absolute... there was a feast, wasn't there? A clamour around Liam Delap from Premier League clubs, because they knew he's a player with real potential. Scored a lot of goals for Ipswich in his first season in the Premier League, despite all their troubles. And we're talking about £125 million for Alexander Isak. £30 million for a young striker with a bit of proven pedigree in the Premier League. It was an absolute snip. And so I think it was a real coup for Chelsea that they got Liam Delap ahead of all of the other big guns that were trying to get him. And it speaks volumes, I think, of where Chelsea have come. And Carver, you've done this story intimately. You know the club very, very well. But what has impressed me with Chelsea's approach is they've taken a long-term approach to all of it. They've known that they can't necessarily compete immediately with Manchester City and Arsenal for the title. And so they've said, right, what do we need to do? You look at the average age of their squad. You look at the players they're buying. And everybody mocked them when they were putting these players on 6-year, 7-year contracts. But these are 21, 22-year-olds. That isn't even necessarily the last contract they'll sign in their careers.
And Rob, also, they make decisions very quickly in terms of if it's not working for them, right?
They move them on.
Nkunku, I know, wasn't one of the younger ones, but straight away, out the door, got good money for him. Carney Chukwuemeka, right, paid good money for him, got good money for him. But he was there 2 minutes.
Renato Vega as well, who went.
It feels like it's a very modern approach to football recruitment and football management of a football club. And I don't mean management as in the manager, the head coach. I mean in the way that Chelsea is managed. And they've been criticised an awful lot. But I at the start of the season, I thought they were outside challenges, maybe if not for the title. I think the way Arsenal and Liverpool have spent, probably not for the title, but I wouldn't be surprised if Chelsea made Champions League again. And they're building something, and all of these players are getting better, they're getting more experience, they're developing. Guess what? Their value is increasing while they're playing them as well. And so it's actually a pretty good business model that Chelsea have got right now.
Yeah, I wanted to speak about how close they were to pulling the plug on Nicholas Jackson. We'll have to do that another time as well, because we've got so much more to get in after the break. Over £230 million spent this summer by Manchester United. And just 4 players in the end. Emi Martinez was not one of them. It looks like the goalkeeping situation was a good bit of business. We'll talk Manchester United, everything at Old Trafford after the break. So Emi Martinez was heavily linked, wasn't he, with the move to Manchester United on the last day of the window, but United opted to sign Senna Lomans instead. That is how you say it. We've checked it. Speak to him if you're not happy with that one. Rob, are you surprised that United let that opportunity of a World Cup winner go by?
No. But I can understand why a lot of football fans are. Look, on the face of it, it makes no sense, does it? And you've got Senna Lomans, who is a prospect. You know, the data which Manchester United are using increasingly in their recruitment, which a lot of other clubs at the top end of the Premier League have done as well. All of the data said that this guy has the potential to be Manchester United's number one in years to come. But people would say, well, hang on, Emi Martinez could be your number one now. He's a World Cup winner with Argentina, one of the best goalkeepers in the world. They didn't even try for Gianluigi Donnarumma, who is one of the best goalkeepers of his generation. Why? Because there's been a change in policy, a change in strategy at Manchester United. They don't want to buy more experienced players in on huge wages who have no sell-on value from the club's perspective, which they've done an awful lot of in the past. Their focus is on trying to do more of what Chelsea have done, buy young talent that they can improve, who they believe have the potential to be first-team players and superstars in the years to come, so that they're not wasting money. We know that it's tight with PSR, and their entire focus in this window was in attacking areas. They spent £207.2 million on 3 attacking players, and they think they've got the best in class when it comes to Mateus Cunha, Brian Mbeumo and Benjamin Sesko. They're delighted with that work, and they did that knowing that they need to improve midfield, knowing that they need to improve defence, but knowing also that they can't solve all of the squad's imbalances in one transfer window. And all of the strategy for Manchester United said, we have to score more goals. If we want to make it into the top 6, we have to score more goals. And that is more important than us stopping goals, more important than us conceding fewer goals. So that's why this window is focused entirely on the attacking areas. It'll be a different focus in the next transfer window. It's all part of Manchester United's regeneration. The fans won't necessarily agree with it. They won't necessarily understand it. They'll be crying out for a midfielder, I'm sure. Yeah. United will say we've got 4 top-quality international midfielders and we've got Kobbie Mainoo who can't even get in the side at the minute. Why would we buy another midfielder? Man United fans won't like that, but they're sticking to their guns, the Manchester United bosses. They have a new strategy, it's data-led, and they're going to stick with that until it brings them success.
And look, Carver, they've tried to, as Rob has said there, buy young, exciting talent with sell-on value in the names like Jadon Sancho, Anthony, Rasmus Højlund, who were all 21, 22, even younger than that when they came in. 86 million, 72 million, 73. Add that one up if you can. And, then you've got Anthony leaving for, what, £21.7 million and the other 2 on loan. It's not a great look, is it?
It isn't, but I think United have cut their losses on some of those players. Anthony, you mentioned, I think they signed him, 3 years ago for €100 million. They're letting him go for €25 million 3 years later. But these were decisions that were made by different people at Manchester United. We know now Ineos, Jim Ratcliffe are in charge of the football operations. And the same has happened at Chelsea. The new people who are inside the building have to deal with some mistakes that were made in the past, and they have to make losses and they have to make big calls. And that is why they've had to act with these players. I think in the short term, it's bad medicine to take, but I think in the long term, it's for the best for everyone at the club.
Yeah, I just wonder in the last 30 seconds we've got, Rob, less than that, how happy Amorim will be with that window out of 10.
Look, I think he's bought into the project. He's part of the discussions, and all of the transfers that were made with his blessing and his understanding. So yeah, it feels like they're all on the same page right now. They haven't got every decision right, but they've got a lot of more work to do. It's been described to me as a juggernaut, Manchester United, that hasn't had anybody piloting it right in the past. They think hopefully they're steering it in the right direction now.
Rob, Carve, thank you very much indeed. The correspondents with us for the last hour. Enjoyed that. Up next, the Premier League show with the brilliant Mr. Martin O'Neill. You don't want to miss that one, everyone. See you next time.